Hi there, folks. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Tiffany Taylor, and I have the pleasure of serving as a partner and co-president for the ASU+GSV Summit. And as a former classroom teacher and someone who deeply believes in our mission here at GSV, ensuring all people have equal access to participate in the future, I am so excited for today's conversation about the power of inquiry-based leadership. So I'll tell you, in my years in the K-12 ecosystem, as a classroom teacher to school leadership to ed policy and nonprofit leadership, there's one thing I know to be true about the power of people. When they are supported, encouraged to be curious, and encouraged to be innovative, the impact on our schools, companies, communities, and broader society is undeniable. And it is an incredibly important time to be having this conversation. So this year's ASU+GSV Summit theme is learning at the speed of light, which is really reflective of where we are right now at a time when ed tech and innovation in education is evolving at an unprecedented pace. So as I think about the incredible districts and education leaders that I've worked with over the last 20 plus years, what I also know to be true is that I've never met a systems leader or entrepreneur that has scaled innovation to the point of truly changing outcomes that hasn't had a learning posture or curiosity. So, folks, this conversation will definitely be the highlight of my day because when I tell you, when I read Ask by Dr. Jeff Wetzler, I saw my own leadership reflected back at me. I've had the privilege of working alongside Jeff in various capacities over the years, and his dedication to improving learning and innovation has truly been inspiring because with his 25 plus years of experience as an entrepreneur and co-CEO, he's consistently been focused on one question: how can we learn better? So today we have Jeff, we have Dr. Desmond Blackburn, we have Dr. Lori Burgos, and Christopher Dennis here with us to share insights and experiences with the Ask approach and how this approach provides actionable strategies to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics, foster strong relationships, and empower organizations to harness their collective intelligence and innovation. So that was a lot. So let's dive in to have everyone introduce themselves just with your name, your role, and one surprising thing that you've learned in the last month or two. And with that, Desmond, I'd love to start with you.
Hey, Tiffany, thank you so much. Desmond Blackburn, lifelong career educator, 28 and a half years. I'm currently president and CEO of Facing History and Ourselves. And one thing I recently learned, I'll say has been reaffirmed, and that is the commitment to civic education and in a civil society that I felt in my community
Yeah,
recently.
I appreciate that, Desmond. Thank you so much. Lori?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Burgos, and I am the proud superintendent of the Shorewood School District in Shorewood, Wisconsin. And something I have learned recently is German alongside my youngest son, who is 14 and an eighth grader and enrolled in a German class and wanted a learning partner.
I love it. I love it. All right, Christopher.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Tiffany. I'm Chris Dennis. I am the Associate Head of School at Campbell Hall School in Studio City, California. We are a K-12 independent school, and we have the most vibrant community full of curious, inquiring minds. And one of the things that I've learned recently, or relearned, as Desmond shared, is the fact that the tenure and the time that people pour into their organizations is truly an asset. And the opportunities we get to remind them of that is very affirming. So excited to be here, a part of the conversation.
Yes, thanks so much, Chris. And Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Wetzler, author of Ask, co-founder of Transcend, proud former colleague of Tiffany's as well. And it's just a joy to be here. And I will say one of my learnings, I'll follow Laurie's lead as a parent as well. I have an 11th grade daughter who is a student athlete, and I am learning about the complexities that student athletes need to juggle and the challenges that can pose when one is also in 11th grade. So it's a raw topic for our family, but there's a lot of learning I'm discovering very recently.
I love it. Probably raw and real topic.
Absolutely.
To be completely honest. Well, thanks so much for sharing. And last thing, for everyone joining us today, we truly hope you engage with these dynamic leaders by using the chat to share questions or reactions or reflections about the conversation and the questions being posed. And so, Jeff, I would love to start by grounding this conversation with you, sharing a bit about why, right? What inspired you to write this book and what continues to motivate you in this work, in this moment in time?
So the book is really inspired both by a problem and an opportunity.
Mhm.
The problem is that as leaders and really as people, we are all surrounded by many other people. Those
Yeah.
could be our colleagues, our parents we work with, students, et cetera, who have incredible ideas and insights and perspectives and even feedback for us that too often we don't hear.
Yeah.
And when we do hear it, we often don't hear the most essential or the most important stuff. That's the problem. And it's a problem that I have suffered from myself as a leader, but also a problem I've seen many other leaders suffer from. At the same time, I think it's an opportunity because when we actually can tap into it, the kinds of decisions we can make together, the ways we can collaborate, the innovations that we can do, the quality of our relationships can be extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so I have been very fortunate in my career to inherit and then over time refine a set of tools that really helps us tap into that possibility.
Mhm.
And so the motivation for writing the book in many ways was to pay it forward.
Yeah.
So that many more people can do that. And in the organization that I co-founded, Transcend, we really believe in the power of community-based engagement and community-based in design. And we find that when leaders engage their communities, that's where the answers are. That's where the best ideas are. And that's also where the coalitions get built. So I've seen it in that context, but I've seen it in many other contexts. And it is something that's learnable. And I wanted to share with others what I've learned.
I love it. I love it. So you talk about, the curious leaders and the leaders who ask the questions. They have the opportunity to be in community, to build connection. When you think about what leaders who don't ask, what they miss out on, what is it? Like, what is that hidden wisdom that surrounds leaders, and what keeps it hidden, Jeff?
Yeah. So in researching the book, I discovered some patterns of what are the most common things that people around leaders don't tell them that if the leaders could find out would could be transformational.
Yeah.
One of the most common things is the struggles and challenges that people are dealing with. And so these are things that leaders themselves need to know. These are
Yes.
things that leaders probably could help clear the way to help solve, but quite often they don't find that out. So
Yeah.
that's one. A second one is people's true beliefs about an issue, especially if it's a controversial issue, especially if they think their beliefs might be unpopular,
Yeah.
or that the leader might not agree with them. Often leaders don't get that. A third one that I think is, incredibly important is people's most honest feedback for the leaders, observations of how the leaders themselves could do better and raise their game.
Yeah.
And then the last one, which I think is very related to innovation, is people's wild and crazy ideas.
Yes.
Their ideas for what would actually be a game changer
Yeah.
that they might think just are too crazy to even share.
Yeah.
But those are often the ideas that lead the way forward. That if leaders could tap into, it would light the path.
I love it. I love it. And when you think about the ask approach and when you think about what leaders can do to tap into that hidden wisdom that you talk about, what are some of those things and help us understand at the highest level what this ask approach truly is?
Absolutely. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen there?
Yes.
So the ask approach consists of 5 practices, each of which is grounded in research
Mhm.
and tested out in action that when put together, give us the greatest possible chance of really tapping into all that wisdom we were just talking about. The first one is called choose curiosity. I believe everything has to start with genuine curiosity. If you ask questions, but you aren't genuinely curious, it will be inauthentic.
Yes.
And conversely, when you are curious, I think it radiates an energy that leads people to want to share with you.
Yeah.
And I believe that curiosity is not a trait that some people have and other people lack, but really a choice that we can all make. And so the first step is really awakening that curiosity to make new discoveries, unexpected connections.
Yeah.
The second step is called make it safe. And this is a recognition, and I learned this the hard way as a leader, I will admit, that even if I'm curious to learn from you, If someone doesn't feel safe telling you what they really think and feel and know, you're not going to learn it. You're not going to find it out. And this plays out especially acutely along lines of difference, anytime you're interacting across different lines of difference or power. And so step 2 is a whole set of strategies called Make It Safe, which is how to make it easier, more comfortable for people to tell you the truth, especially hard truths. Step 3 is the heart of the Ask approach. It's called Pose Quality Questions. And it's really about broadening the repertoire of questions that we have to really get at the essence of what other people think and feel and know. And I think that even though we're all born curious, we never really get taught what are different questions that we can ask, depending if I'm trying to learn someone's point of view or elicit their ideas or invite their feedback or different things like that. And so it's a whole taxonomy of questions that we can use depending on what we're trying to learn. And then, of course, once we ask the questions, it all comes down to how well we listen to the answers. And so step 4 is all about listening to learn.
Yes.
And listening to learn is, of course, very different than listening to prove a point or listening to be right or listening to make someone do something. It's a different intention. And so this is essentially a set of skills and strategies for how to vastly expand what we're actually hearing people say and also not say. Listening not just for the content of of what they say, but also the emotions and also the actions that they're taking as well.
Yeah.
And then the final step is my favorite step because, as you noted, I'm kind of like a junkie for learning.
Yes.
And the final step is all about this is how we learn, reflect and reconnect. Reflection is how we convert our experience into insights, and our insights into action. And I think a lot of people perceive reflection to be something that is a little mysterious, that you have to go on some meditation retreat to do. But I try to really break it down in a very practical method called sift it and turn it. Sifting through what are the most important things I've heard and then turning it over in a systematic way in my mind several times to really squeeze out the best insights, but not just for myself. It's not an extractive process where I just take something from you. The reconnect part is really what closes the loop. It's going back to the other person and saying, thank you for taking the time, the risk to share this with me. Here's what I learned. Here's what I'm going to do about it. Is there anything different you were hoping that I would learn? And that's what deepens the opening for ongoing learning and sharing together. So in a nutshell, that's the Ask approach.
Yeah, even as you're speaking, what's coming up for me, and I've read through the book like twice at this point, it's just the need for humility, right? In each and every one of these steps. And so thanks for one, giving us that oversight and just sharing just a little bit of insight into the power of inquiry and the approach. And I want to turn it over to our guests and our panelists today. And so again, welcome. I know you've all read Ask just like me, and I know you all are leaders who just value the power of inquiry and understand the power of supporting your people. And so I'd love for you just to share with us why you believe deeply, right, in the power of visionary education leaders asking questions. And Chris, I'd love to start with you with this one.
Yeah, I'm excited, so you may have to wind me down because when I think about opportunity we get to lead organizations and communities, it's a big responsibility. So I feel like inquiry is a part of your developmental kind of approach as a leader, right? If you're truly a developed leader at a higher level, you're going to be able to know the value of being curious and asking questions, because then you're going to be able to find the right resources for the right moments. And you don't necessarily just do that transactionally. It's a perpetual work. And even walk into the car or even in a meeting, everything is formal when you're a leader. But if you're curious enough, you'll pick up on the themes and know the right time to apply it. And I think that's the value of being curious, is that you're always on, but it's not a daunting task if you understand that humility you spoke of is the opportunity to listen to the people and get them the resources they needed.
Appreciate that. All right, Lori?
Yes, thank you. 3 things come to mind for me when I think about the importance of leadership and inquiry-based leadership in education. First is I really believe that relationships are the engine of any kind of positive change in any organization, but in particular in a people-based organization like schools. And so prioritizing relationships is always important. Asking questions and being curious helps set the tone for a healthy culture in which you are modeling that kind of behavior for your team and for everybody in the organization. So we can never underestimate the positive of powerful relationships on our schools and community. And I also believe that public schools are really the heartbeat of so many communities. And it's a place where it may be one of the few spaces actually left socially where a lot of different people come together every day with the purpose of teaching and learning or developing children. And so those spaces are so important as we have divergent thinking and we value divergent thinking. We can learn so much from one another when we prioritize that. And again, as leaders, if we're modeling that behavior, it helps our teams coalesce around children and around bringing out the best in children. And of course, in order to do that, we as leaders need to bring out the best in our people.
Got it.
And finally, positionally, and I wholeheartedly agree that when you become any kind of formal leader, a superintendent, a principal, or any kind of administrator and hold that kind of formal position of power, you really need to separate or understand the difference between the personal and the positional, and then where those two things come together. And so I think one area where they do come together is that we are the lead learners of our organizations. And again, if you are modeling that for your team and creating the conditions to bring out the best in everyone in your organization, modeling that self-awareness, that curiosity is what sets the tone for that ripple effect to create those healthy relationships that I started talking about.
Yeah, I appreciate you talking about culture, right? And modeling and creating the environment, right, that allows that to be not just simply expected, right, but a part of the DNA of who you are as a community. Thanks so much, Lori. Desmond?
Yeah, Tiffany and colleague, what I would add there is maybe 3 points. One, just how rare it is you'll find from a community's perspective or from your employees' perspective or the people you're serving to be asked their thoughts and opinions,
Yeah.
right? Like, and what a competitive advantage it is as you're comparing and contrasting, your ability to lead and manage through very difficult, problematic situations versus some other leader, right? So like one, just how rare it is. Two, I think Lori mentioned the impact of positionality.
Yeah.
You cannot, it's impossible to overestimate how challenging positionality is, especially when we have these degree related acronyms behind our name,
Yes.
and then we have these titles on the door. Like you have no idea how problematic that is in getting people to open up and tell you truth.
Yes.
So much so that permission granting phase has to happen over and over and over and
Yes.
over again, right? And then last but not least, you gotta put words to action, and people will, if they finally get a chance to believe you, right, verbally, they're
Yes.
gonna want to see it in action. And so and that's where the real opportunity is to put action behind words and intent.
I love that. I love that. And Desmond, I'd love to stick with you for a moment, and Lori and Chris, I'd also like to hear from you because I know so many of the leaders, be it our education leaders, the innovators, the entrepreneurs who are with us today, join not only to hear your reflections, but also to hear about what this looks like tangibly. And so I'd love to hear from each of you a brief example of how asking questions have made a difference in your leadership and impact. And Desmond would love to again to start with you with that one.
Well, again, I'm just going to exacerbate on how rare it is, and that's the feedback that I would regularly get, right? But I would also advise on just how beneficial it is to solving really thorny problems. I mean, the ones that inspire hair follicles not to no longer, right? Speaking from experience.
Okay.
Um, School closures, program closures, things that make school and system leaders really cringe when thinking about taking these pieces on, I continue to be pleasantly shocked
Mhm.
when interacting with community members and leaders after the pure, transparent honesty is explained to human beings, to members of a community, to parents, and to advocates, right? And when we're not coming to the table with answers, but we're coming to the table with pure, authentic questions without any sort of preference or prejudice towards what an outcome is. Again, these are really, really rare, and they help to solve the thorniest of problems. And I can tell you from a school district perspective, it's hard to get tougher than when you're faced with the challenge of trying to discontinue, even for good reasons, discontinue a program or discontinue a school. These are the thorniest of things to take on.
Appreciate that. And Chris, can you give us a concrete example of how asking questions have made a difference in your leadership and impact?
Wow, yeah. Let me find one healthy one. I think a lot of organizations use surveys and different tools to get information.
Mhm.
And one of the challenges with survey information is that how are you going to report that data back?
Yeah.
And a survey is just the tool, but the information is what we actually want to discuss. So I think using the ask approach, we've been able to allow our faculty and staff to engage with us through tools, but through our reporting mechanisms, actually allow them to see us reflect and connect. So if we had a tough season and the survey data said, hey, 48% believe that we're going to do something with the results of the survey, Chris needs to step to the podium and say, we understand that less than 50% of you believe we're going to take some action. Based on that, these are the 3 initiatives we're rolling out. And I've seen evidence since August that consistently going and showing our work, but also saying we're going to be vulnerable and let you partner with us on the outcomes of this information has been beautiful. It's been beautiful. And I've had folks say it in meetings directly, like, we appreciate the work the school is doing to listen to us. And, we want to take that vulnerability and honor it. And I think that's what the approach allows us to do, because that's the outcome of making it safe.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one of the things I learned from Jeff and one of the other leaders that worked alongside him, Susan Aziambi, is not only being clear about when you're taking the feedback and how you're leveraging, but also being clear when you're not and why you're not using that information, because that builds trust and connection and allows that environment to remain open and true. Lori?
Sure. One example that comes to mind for me is that it's very typical for a superintendent when you're new to a community to formulate an entry plan, which usually consists of many different action steps that includes a listening tour of some sort, where you are going out and you are deliberately meeting with students, families, residents, caretakers, the Chamber of Commerce, right? Really a broad spectrum of people in your community to hear from them, hear what's important, learn about points of pride, learn history, just take stock of all the amazing things that are happening and areas of improvement. And there are many different ways of doing that. And so I think the ask approach inspires you as a leader to think, this doesn't have to just take place during the period of a 90-day entry plan.
Yes.
When you think about what those actions are, so what does it mean for me as a leader to be setting up time and carving out time in my calendar and creating opportunities for not just the formal kind of survey or listening sessions to take place, but also informal coffee meetings, walk and talks, little mini challenges that I set up sometimes for my leadership team to say, hey, have you checked in with anyone from your support staff recently? Why don't you find 3 people and ask them 3 questions to see what's going well, what's hard, what would make their job better? And sometimes those little micro interactions are really what help build the trust more than the bigger actions or more formal actions that we might be taking. And so I think that is a critical piece of any leader's calendar and the time when you take a look at how much time are you spending in meetings talking versus how many times are you sitting back and listening, and taking time to formulate really quality questions also makes a big difference. So, and people feel that. It isn't just adults that feel that. I can give another example from home from my 14-year-old that I mentioned. So we were together this past weekend and he said to me, "Mom, shouldn't you be asking me better questions? I know that's really important to you." And so what that told me was he actually has a lot of things he wants to say. And I do think that people really do have a lot that they want to tell you, but they're not going to take that risk the first time, maybe not the second time. It's going to take time and investment to build that relationship, to build a sense of trust, to show up and be authentic, to be vulnerable. And the onus of that really is on you as a leader to take that risk and show people, nope, I'm going to be consistent and I'm here again. And what you have to say really matters to me. But it really doesn't take long once you establish some of those meaningful connections, then people do open up, because in a community like Shorewood, we serve a diverse population of about 1,900 students. And it's a community that cares very, very deeply about its schools. And so at the end of the day, in a time of a lot of division that we're all experiencing, I know that is a common shared desire of our community, and that's always a grounding point. So finding different ways to connect, ask different questions, and invite people in to those problem-solving processes really does make a difference and strengthens your relationship, but also strengthens your leadership within the organization.
Yeah. And Jeff, what's coming up for you as you hear from Lori and Desmond and Chris?
Well, first of all, I love the ways in which each of you is illustrating different practices in the ask approach, whether it be Laura, you talking about the importance of making it safe, or Desmond talking about bringing quality questions in engaging with communities, or Chris talking about reflecting and reconnecting. It's just great to hear how you each are enacting those. I had a couple of questions, and we have a moment. One would just be, can you share, maybe one or two of you, what are some of the most powerful quality questions that you do ask? So, Laurie, when you're talking about a listening tour, engaging with your community, or, Desmond, when you're actually sitting down at the table with people and maybe having to make some hard decisions together, and instead of bringing answers, bringing questions, or Chris, when you're sharing result, like, what are some of the actual questions that you found to be incredibly helpful?
I'll start. So I would say this isn't the question. It's a question that's not the question, right? The most powerful tool for me as a go-to is tell me. Tell me a time when things were going really well in the school district, or your children. Tell me about a time when your children experienced a lot of success in our schools, or tell me about a time when things didn't go so well, or you didn't get the response that you wanted. So I think just opening that as a statement and then allowing people to tell their story usually is my best question. But I also think inviting what you mentioned before, that people do have a lot of kind of crazy ideas out there, and some things like we're inviting that imagination or curiosity to come into play, to say, if we could start over, if we could create the ideal school for you or for your child, what would that look like? What would that include? What would be those non-negotiable components? It also allows people and gives them permission to share some things with you that maybe they wouldn't otherwise share.
I love it. And I'll just, I think what your example of tell me highlights the fact that a quality question doesn't have to have a question mark. It has to have the intention to learn from somebody else. And conversely, not everything with a question mark is a quality question as well. So thank you for bringing that out.
I would just double down on that, right? So one of the questions I ask quite frequently is just tell me what success looks like for you. Like you name it and how you'll know when we have achieved it, right? And that's a question that can be applied to multiple settings, right? And then another question or another thing I may tap into is just like, tell me where you're not expecting me to ask questions, but where you see my role in being decisive and making like the decision, Okay. And it is just amazing how often people will readily say and answer those questions in a very thoughtful, meaningful way. Well, here are the spaces where I'm hoping I want input, and then here are the spaces where I'm sorry, earn your money and make a decision, right? Like literally that's been stated. And so again, I'm just a complete fan of engaging with the people who we're working with in a very authentic way. There's just no telling the kind of insights you receive.
I love that. Chris?
I'll add. I've been thinking about what were the questions I've asked in the first 2 days of this week with people I've engaged with, because I think it's situational. If there's a standing meeting with one of your direct reports, I've been asking, what's at the bottom of your task list that you wish you could move up. Because I try to get folks out of the urgent and like, what's that strategic thing that you just didn't have a thought partner on that I can just try to help shake up a little bit. And one of my go-tos that I could use my colleagues' feedback on is how can I help? Because in some cases, I volunteer to offer more of a resource of self than a collaborative. But I think it actually does give folks the opportunity to take advantage of that ask if they're feeling safe enough. So those are two that I've been orbiting.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. One of my go-tos is, was that helpful, right? After our conversation or after I've given some feedback and genuinely sitting in the space. And then also asking Jeff, just to your question, like what led you to take that approach, to set that vision, to take that step or to share that particular idea? Like those are my two go-tos.
Yeah, I love it. I'll just share one go-to I have that I like to ask people in my organization or my team, which is, to what extent are we setting you up to contribute all that you can and want to be contributing here? And if not, what more do you want to be offering? And it's amazing to me. Almost invariably, people say there's more I want to be giving, but I don't feel like I can, or I don't feel like I'm set up to do that. And it leads to a really interesting conversation about how to maximize everyone's contribution to a mission. I'll just ask one other question, which is, I don't think that inquiry-driven leadership is always the default for leaders. And in many ways, I think leaders face a set of cultural messages and forces and conditioning that would almost invite them to do the opposite. And so I'm curious from you all, what makes it hard to lead with questions? What do you have to overcome in order to operate this way as a leader, and how do you overcome it?
I'll jump in. I'll say because of positionality, perhaps because of experience combined with positionality, there's actually a great demand on those of us with titles and acronyms, like showing up with clearly defined answers and being the antithesis of what we're supporting, right? So I'm going to say there's a push and a pull on the ego of a leader to like be this air quote leader that we might read about or dream about or even feel pressured to live into. And so it's really, I think it takes great courage to lead in this way. And by all means, I don't want to make it seem like, day in and day out with Desmond Blackburn is like just one love fest after another, right? No, there are moments of real tension. There are people who will never name their firstborn after me. Like that stuff happens too. But I try to lean into the opportunity that's created by community.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Lori or Chris?
I think that's a really good question. I think sometimes the models that we are following as leaders, we try to take the attributes of what we've seen. And sometimes it's hard to back out of those ways or those archetypes of being, because quite frankly, at some point, leadership is lonely. you don't always have a peer that you can go to that understands exactly what you're dealing with, unless you are intentional about building that type of community. And then on the other side, your team is going to build the conditions around safety based off of how you operate. So you also have to give yourself space to step back and be empathetic, and demonstrate humility, because if they know you don't want to be a curious leader,
Yeah.
they will say yes. If you do want to be a curious leader, they will say yes. So I think continuous professional development is healthy. One of the things that we did was we made sure our entire strategic group read the book. So now we all have a similar framework that we can use with each other to kind of pull each other out of some of these ways that are kind of not the best for our organization. But I think it's who have you patterned yourself after. And I would encourage all of the leaders on the call to understand that you are somebody's vision of leadership. So it's healthy to go ahead and show them that you've got this skill set.
I love it. That's great, Chris. Lori?
Well, one of my mentors told me, this was the first time I was going into a formal leadership role at a school district, said to me, you know, Lori, you're a really strong leader. You have a lot of great ideas to share. You bring a lot of leadership qualities to the table in meetings, and you will become an even better leader when you become a better listener. And that stuck with me because it really was the first time that someone called out listening as a skill that is something that you need to work on actively to develop. It hadn't even crossed my mind up until that point. And that was one of those points in time that really was pivotal for me. And after that, I, of course, then I loved this person. This was my mentor.
Yes.
And so the words were, I received them very well, and they came with a little sting, because I thought, all these years and you haven't told me this. And now what am I supposed to do with this? Where do I even go? Can you even learn how to listen? And so in fact, you can. And I really made that a priority for myself in trying to think about, how do I slow down my mind? And it takes a lot of discipline to do that, because I am a fast thinker. I enjoy fast-paced work. I can make connections very quickly, but it's not always the speed and the pace that's helpful. And as you move into leadership roles, it isn't necessarily your job to come up with all of the ideas or to make all of the connections. Your job is to help other people on your team do that very well. And so again, that's not always something that's necessarily taught to you as you're going through formal coursework or going to different professional development series. At least it didn't used to be. I do think books like Ask and other tools are more prioritized more because of the value that they bring, and not just getting a better product, but bringing out the best in our people. And ultimately, that is a really important function that we have. It's not really up to us and our roles necessarily to do all the work. And when people bring problems to us, the default mode, because again, we need things quickly, and there's such a sense of urgency, and there truly is for a lot of our students in meeting their needs. But at the same time, we have to resist that temptation to try to move fast, and also help empower our staff and give them and tell them and encourage them and say, it doesn't have to be you alone, and it certainly can't be me alone solving the problem, but together we can do this together. And I think sometimes people look to us to come up with the solutions. And if we do, we're actually not strengthening our systems. We're actually weakening our systems, because what we need to do is turn the problems back over to the people with support, with good questions, with check-ins, with resources. But ultimately, I really do believe that we have the collective wisdom in our communities to solve the toughest problems that we face.
I so appreciate that. I mean, so much resonated. And well, I will say one thing that I've been, just really sitting with, as I mentioned at the top of the call, is just this unprecedented pace of change, right? In every aspect of our society, but definitely in education, definitely as it relates to this intersection of education and innovation. And Jeff, I'd love, before we turn it over to audience questions, just to hear your thoughts about this often tension that exists between the urgency to innovate and the time required for that exploration and inquiry. We just, really want to hear your thoughts on this tension and the risk of not centering curiosity in our pursuit of innovation.
Yeah. I mean, I think we live in a culture that can prioritize speed and urgency,
Mhm.
and that can be in direct tension with truly getting curious.
Yes.
Um, but as you said, things are changing so fast. We got to innovate, not just to keep up, but to stay ahead of the curve. And I would go back to what I had just heard Laurie say, which is that the answers to our toughest challenges lie within our communities.
Mhm.
And so innovation doesn't matter for its own sake. Innovation matters to get better results for young people.
Yeah.
And the source of the insights about how to get those results live with young people and educators and people closest to the action. And people sometimes say, like, well, kids don't know the science of reading, but kids are experts in their own experience. There's no greater expert in their own experience than a young person, as our educators, as our parents, etc. And so that's where, as Laurie said, that's where the answers live. And I would say we don't have time not to tap into that, because we need to get to a better place.
I love it. I love it. So I am going to make good on what I shared at the top of the call. And I know everyone who has joined has heard some incredible reflections from our guests today. And I've seen your questions coming through the chat. And so would love to shift gears a little bit if the guests are open to it to start taking some of those questions. Does that work? All right.
Absolutely.
So from Yvonne Williams, we had this question. It was regarding transparency for processes such as portfolio management consolidations or closures. Some leaders are often apprehensive out of fear of causing panic or enrollment flight, right? Just a very specific example. And that risk seems very real in today's context. Like, what counter argument can be shared to reaffirm engaging the community with transparency and vulnerability? And we'd love to hear from one of you on that.
I feel like
Uh,
Desmond. Oh yeah, go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
oh, go for it. Yeah, go for it, Desmond.
Well, I was actually hoping not to get called on because I actually believe in what I call radical transparency.
Mhm.
And part of it is a defense mechanism against a weakness I have, a personal weakness I have, and that is I have a very poor memory. And so my fear is that, because if you're not transparent, you have to actually recall everything you've said and who you said it to.
Yeah,
So if I commit myself to what I call radical transparency,
yeah,
I get to mitigate my personal weakness, which is a poor memory, and
yeah,
just wherever I am, I'm committed to the truth as I understand it to be. Um, and yeah, that may cause challenges, but again, we're in my view, we're dealing with, believe it or not, like very intelligent people who actually don't believe when you tell them everything is going well. And like there are no problems and there are no challenges and there's nothing that like you don't understand or know how to do. Intelligent people in our audiences don't actually go for that. So
mhm. I
And I'll
appreciate.
just maybe add one tiny coda to that, which is that I think one of the greatest ways to respect someone's intelligence is to ask them a question,
Mm,
is to approach them as if they might have something that we hadn't thought of
yeah,
before.
I appreciate that. And so the next question is from Antonio. He says, in a post-election environment where narrow nationalistic narratives around citizenship and identity are taking hold, how can we continue to foster curiosity and create safe spaces for challenging these single stories and promoting more inclusive understandings? Any of our panelists want to?
I'm happy to jump in on this one, unless anyone wants to. I don't have a quick silver bullet answer to this, but I have come across research in doing this work which talks about the ways in which curiosity begets curiosity. And these researchers, we can send this as a link afterwards if you want to see the study, literally had people of different political places on the political spectrum talking with each other and about divisive political issues. And what they found is that the more that person A treats person B with some curiosity, the more that they listen to person B, the more that they think that they demonstrate an openness to being influenced by person B. It turns out it makes person B more curious about person A as well. And person B finds that person A's views seem to be more objective, more thoughtful, more compelling, and person A is even perceived as more likable by person B. And so I don't think this is the total panacea to the whole thing, but even if we want to influence somebody else, it turns out that the research shows they're going to be more open to influence if we allow ourselves to also learn from them too.
I appreciate that. Yes. And oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I'll just add, I think it's helpful just, to state, like, folks are feeling all different kinds of ways at this moment to even consider the question. And, with cards on the table, it's okay to acknowledge a lack of closure. Because I think for some folks, they're ready to be at step 5 of a 10-step process, and some folks are ready to be, they're still at step 1. And I think the beauty of community is that we've got more time together than we realize. And there was something that brought us together in the first place. So in organizations, schools, it was probably the mission of that organization or the problem we agreed to solve together. So I think where we are now in this environment is, what did we still agree to build together? What can we do? Where are we? But also giving ourselves permission to share some of that vulnerability of, like, hey, this is where I am right now. But also not put on that other person the responsibility of bringing you the closure. It's helpful for the maturation phase, because I would wager if I have a difference with somebody, probably in 6 weeks, I need to partner with them on something that we both care about, and we need each other. So, but acknowledging that lack of closure, and also acknowledging, like, hey, maybe a little raw today, but we're still in this thing together.
Appreciate that. And Laura, any brief thoughts before we go to the next audience question?
And I realize how contextual this question is, and thinking about the moment we're living right now. But I do think this also speaks to the importance of building the relationships, setting up those times and spaces, and being consistent, and those practices, if you're making it safe for people, and offering the spaces at the pace of the other person. And I think in ways that people are willing to come and work with you and speak with you. But it really speaks to the importance of needing to invest time in taking these actions and reflecting and communicating back with people, so that you already have some trust built up before we get into a place where I don't know you at all. Now there's additional tension in the community. There's attention now to our country globally. And now we have to try to figure things out, and we don't even have that kind of trusting relationship. So I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to make sure now that we are finding those smaller spaces and ways to connect with people, and putting ourselves out there and offering that up to continue dialogue. And maybe the dialogue is shorter at certain times or with certain folks, but knowing that you're there and continuing to take those steps to make it safe.
I appreciate that. And Laura, you actually started to answer another question from an audience member, Tabitha, who was building on Antonio's question. And it was really around just asking for concrete ways to, set up pre-work for leaders to set the tone and the space for the foundation. How do we ready ourselves to go into those informal spaces, those check-ins, those, large group environments, to really ensure that the type of curiosity and questioning and the ask method is able to be used with fidelity? What are some of the ways that you ready yourself, Chris or Lori or Desmond, to say, okay, when I have my one-on-one check-in or my team meeting, or I'm engaging with a new partner or a partner with a different idea, this is how I ready myself to go in with a curious posture?
Wow. I think it's almost like a spiritual practice
Mm,
where it's like you have to know that this is a part of the way you function.
yeah.
So for me, that's just policy governed. Like at the start of every year, unfortunately, you're going to hear me read our mission, our diversity statement. I'm going to go through these pillars because I need to be able to get things in a position where I can be the most effective.
Yeah.
So it's like the athlete, put yourself in a position to make a play. Okay. So get to your spot and then go from there. And I think when it comes to conversations like this, if I'm uninformed, who are the people that I can lean on to help me be more informed?
Yeah.
Let them know that I need them for that.
I appreciate
And sometimes that's just a pre-meeting question, like, hey, these are the 3 things I want to talk about, not on our normal agenda, but I want to prep you because I don't want you to be off guard when I ask you these questions.
Yeah.
So I think it's just really considering the other person. Consider the other person. And as Desmond said, the power dynamics and the positionality, oftentimes you have the upper hand. And if you don't acknowledge that that power dynamic is there, it's just not really fair. So that's what I think about this. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, Jeff, I'd love to hear from you on this. And then our last question from as we wrap will go to you as well. Does that work?
Absolutely. I'll just chime in. I mean, this is such an important and deep question. And one small thing I'll offer, not nearly with the depth of the spiritual preparation that Chris just mentioned, which I think can be really important too, is just to simply ask myself one question before I walk into any conversation or situation, which is, what can I learn from this person?
Mm.
If I go in with that and remind myself there's something I can learn from every person, and I ask, what can I learn from this person? It sets the tone with myself and with other people as well.
I appreciate that. All right, the last question before we wrap, and Jeff, it's one that really ask around like, what are some concrete suggestions or practices that just can help us all listen better, right?
Mhm.
Just gave one example, asking what can you learn from this person, but what are 1 or 2 additional practices or suggestions that can help us listen better?
I'll just give you 2 very concrete things.
Okay.
One of them is just simply to check if we've heard the person correctly.
Mm,
And so I just call this paraphrase and test. And
yeah.
it's just simply saying to the other person, this is what I think I heard you say. Did I get that right? Or
Yep.
what did I miss? And it's amazing how powerful that is. I mean, half the time I do it, I realize I did miss something. Or people say, oh, that is what I said, but what I really meant was something else.
Yeah.
It also has the benefit of slowing down the conversation. So if you're in the heat of the moment, there's a back and forth, and you just say, before I respond, I just want to check that I hear you right.
Mm,
It changes everything. And it also, I think, sends the message to the other person that I value you. I value you so much. I care about you so much that I really want to understand. Make sure I got. So if there's nothing else you do, just that one paraphrase and check is almost like the magic power move that I
yes.
think changes everything.
Yeah.
And then the second one I would just say is, I've discovered oftentimes people's first answer to your question is not the most important thing they have to say.
Hmm.
And so I interviewed for the book psychotherapists, and one of the things that they all talk about is this thing called the doorknob moment, which is at the very last second when the therapy session is just about to be over, people have their hand on the door before they're about to walk out. That's when they say, I'm thinking about leaving my spouse, or I'm having an affair, or whatever it may be. And
Yeah.
they're thinking, why did they not tell me this all along?
Right.
And there's all kinds of different reasons. But the takeaway is they don't necessarily say it right away. And
Right.
so the actionable thing that we can just simply do
Yeah.
after someone answers our question is we can just say, what else? Is there more that you have to say on that? Do you have any other thoughts or things like that? And sometimes I'll say with my own team, what else you got? What other ideas? And I'll say to them, I'm going to keep asking you that question until you tell me you're out of ideas, because it keeps getting better every time every time I ask that. And so just that simple question, what else? What more? I call that pulling the thread.
I love it. I love it. Pulling the thread. Well, thank you all for these questions. I can see how much today's conversation is really resonating with so many of you. And even as I think back on the reflections and the many insights that were shared, I'm just so affirmed in my beliefs that our work as educators and leaders and innovators, it ultimately revolves around our people. And again, from start to finish, this work is about empowering them, right, to thrive, to create, and to build. And for that to happen, we must intentionally cultivate the environments that that foster that creativity and curiosity. And so as we wrap our time together with all of these insights and learnings, I do want to invite you to do a few things, right? So one, I invite you to join us for the 2025 ASU+GSV Summit and the AI Show, where we can continue to explore how curiosity can transform our education landscape. And the last thing that I would love for you to do is make sure you grab your copy of the book, as so you can continue your learning and exploration of inquiry-based leadership, and take a note from Chris, have your entire team read it so you can have the shared framework and shared language. And I would be remiss not to thank each and every guest that joined us. Desmond, Chris, Lori, Jeff, thank you so much for making time to be in community with us today to share a bit of your brilliance and your experience with this dynamic group of community members that we brought together today. All right, folks, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and thanks for being a part of the GSV educator community.